Hi everyone, it's Joakim Interview here. Today I'm gonna do the IGDA Leadership keynote on the topic of what is leadership. So, quick introduction on myself. My name is Joakim Interview. I'm the founder and CEO of Elite Game Developers, which is an online game startup school that I founded last year to put together all the knowledge I have from founding two games companies and being in the industry for close to 20 years and distilling them into blog posts, online courses, a podcast. So if you go to elitegamedevelopers.com, you'll find more on the material that I've been creating. There's weekly items coming out, so check it out, and remember to subscribe to my newsletter. So I'm also putting unique content on the newsletter every week. Bit of my background. So I started in gaming actually in 2000 when I joined a small gaming startup in Kuopio, which is in eastern Finland, as a programmer. I stayed there for about a year. We were doing WAP games, which were the earliest mobile games you could possibly play, and at the same time doing also SMS, text-based gaming for mobile phones, which was an interesting experience for me to kind of like see what a gaming startup could look like. So I completed my studies and did a few years of software consultancy before I started my first company, Ironstar Helsinki, in 2005 to do this virtual world called MoiPal, which was supposed to run smoothly on everybody's phones, Java phones, so it could run on the latest Nokia phones, were the best platform, of course. We had really big distribution issues. We didn't really know what we were doing. We were kind of like going in circles in the desert, figuring things out. Eventually, basically, our investors pointed out that maybe you should try something else. This was like years later already, after we've been fumbling in the dark. We got to try out the Facebook gaming, which was really growing big in 2009, and pivoted there. Made actually like a profitability state in about 6 months, and in 2010 we were profitable for a while as a company until Facebook started closing down all the viral channels and everybody was suffering. We needed to close down the company. We couldn't sustain a game where the revenues were basically falling every day. And I went to Supercell to kind of like try to kind of like put myself together again after these 6 years of trying to make Ironstar as a startup work. I saw and learned so much from being at Supercell, from all the cool people there. They were definitely on the top of the edge of like where gaming was going. Mobile was coming up big. At that stage it was still like tablet first, but you could sort of like sense that people would want to bring their devices everywhere and play wherever they went. So Clash of Clans, Heyday came out, big success. I was contemplating it. This is the right time, if ever, to start my second games company. And then I left to start working on Next Games. And we put the founding team together in 2013, raised funding, got the Walking Dead license, got to build awesome games. But then, like, in a few years, we grew so fast. We went to the stock exchange in Helsinki. It was just something that in 2019 I decided that this is like, I felt like being a big company founder wasn't like the ideal for me. I wanted to do something else. I got the passion to actually go back and help a lot of founders at that early stage. That was something I would definitely want to do as the next stage of my career. And then I founded Elite Game Developers, first as a podcast and then writing the blogs. And I've been talking a lot about culture, about leadership, about the identity of a games company in my blog and my podcasts. Those are the sort of the favorite questions I get to ask from founders on my podcast is, what are their leadership style? What it's like to be a CEO of a company that grows from 5 to 10 to 20, 50 to 100 person company. How do you scale yourself to be a leader in those different phases? And what I've kind of discovered from what definitely is the leadership that is required, it usually goes into this kind of realm that you are the person who is setting the tone, the pace, the promises that you've sort of written down in your company values. You are, as the leader, the person who is responsible for everything regarding you setting the example. So everybody will follow your example. This is something that I've seen so many of the CEOs in gaming echo again and again of what they've really learned from growing as a leader. So for folks in the game industry who are curious about leadership, I wanted to pull some examples from history. I think it's very applicable where leaders started figuring out that it's all about their people versus making money, making a fortune. So let's go into some historical examples of what leaders did in the early days of capitalism to actually focus on their people. I think there's a lot here for gaming leaders to take lessons from. Let's go back a bit into like what leadership usually looks like, or if you think about the Industrial Revolution and like how things started cooking up 200 years ago. Well, in a sense, like leaders have always been these kind of intimidating people who might actually like control the teams that they're running, that they push you into certain like modes, and that these kind of industrial magnates 200 years ago who were building factories, they were really like ruling what was happening and what could happen and what shouldn't happen. And they were also taking all the cash for themselves. It was really about like, hey, this is a big opportunity to get rich. Let's build a company. The labor that we have is sort of like an asset that we can move around. And, you know, they will stick around because it's their livelihood. They've moved from the countryside to these industrial cities that were growing, and they can reap the profits from those people. That was what 200 years ago capitalism really focused on. So if you think about this kind of like the old hero leader cult of, hey, the hero leaders believe in their position and authority that makes them a leader. They use their title and authority to force others to conform to their wishes. And they often take a my way or the highway approach into building these businesses. But I really wanted to go into this talk through kind of the lens of those leaders who wanted to change, who wanted to create this bottoms-up culture where the kind of the lowest level of the company, the employees, they would have the best possible life for themselves because they are part of the company. Like, who were these first people? So I did some study and I found this person called Robert Owen, who was a British factory owner, actually from Scotland in the early 19th century. Well, he owned this big factory in Victorian Scotland in New Lanark, and he decided to improve the quality of his workers. But many of his kind of contemporaries didn't share these opinions because the Industrial Revolution was going on, and new machines helped big businesses to make more products like cotton and things like that, and it was very efficient to make a lot of money. And like, if all of a sudden you start worrying about your labor, like, that's taking the focus away from taking on this opportunity of the whole revolution. But Owen was thinking differently. He wrote a book about how much he disagreed with, for instance, child labor, which was like broadly used in the Western world back into 200 years ago. And he felt that there was a really bad kind of vibe going on in how the working class was treated, especially in Britain. And he wrote that it is normal for parents to send their children to work at 7 years old, from 6 o'clock in the morning until 8 o'clock in the night. Children who don't have time to relax. If we do nothing, the country will soon be plunged into a terrible state of danger. So Robert Owen created a factory, or this kind of like model village was built for his workers with their needs in mind. He built a school where children could learn music and study nature, and he provided a shop there with like all sorts of quality goods that could be bought for fair prices. So as this kind of like development proceeded, New Lanark even got this first infant school in the whole world. And most importantly, the workers didn't have to spend incredibly long hours anymore in the factory. He started looking after like what is a decent time, scale down how long they're working versus like spending time with the families. And eventually a lot of visitors started coming from all over the world to see Owen's work, what he was doing in New Lanark, and for the kind of like the whole rest of the Victorian era, this idea that everyone had the right for better working conditions grew, and eventually in years' time it became accepted by the law itself. So it wasn't anymore something that, a very contrarian thinker like Owen could establish, but it became the law. Then another interesting fellow from history. How about like this kind of leadership in tough times? And I want to talk about Ernst Shackleton, who was the captain of the Endurance and several other expeditions that he did. But I'm going to talk about the Endurance expedition to the South Pole. This was in 1914 they went on the trip. But like, let me first introduce you to Ernst Shackleton. I think there's never been any kind of leader that what he was. He led 27 men on a journey to be the first to cross the Antarctica, but he failed on this trip. But why do we care about a leader who failed on his expedition? Well, because what happened instead was incredible. So this was his third Antarctic expedition, and he was leading this Imperial Trans-Antarctic expedition for Britain, and they left England in 2019. The plan was to sail his ship, the Endurance, to Argentina and then head on to Antarctica and then walk across the continent where another crew would pick them up. It was a sort of like a simple plan on paper, but to put everything into context, you didn't have a radio system, no weather reports, no great gear like Gore-Tex or snowmobiles or any kind of like great North Face jackets or whatnot to wear. So the mission was very lofty, but Shackleton had the experience and he had an excellent crew, and he definitely put together the best gear he could in 1914 for a trip like this. So after leaving Argentina, the ship stopped at a whaling station in South Georgia Island. They learned that the Weddell Sea, which was the most dangerous sea in the world, close to the Antarctic continent, was jammed with ice, with the worst ice recorded in history. Some of the whalers encouraged Shackleton to wait until next year so that they would try again. So they spent a month at this whaling station hoping that the situation would improve, but it didn't. So on December 5th, 1914, the crew proceeded down to Antarctica. As you might predict, only 6 weeks later, they were stuck in ice. The ship wasn't going anywhere. Like, it was frozen, and it felt like, they couldn't do anything to free the ship. They tried so many things. They tried cutting through the ice. They spent hours working on it, and nothing was good enough. And they were like thousands of kilometers away from other people, and they had no communication equipment. What could they do? So they finally settled to think that, hey, this ice will eventually move and take them to like better position to free the ship. And they waited for 10 months. Nothing changed. The cold, the ice, and their food supply was running low. So the men began hunting for seals and penguins so that they could like supplement their diet and their food supplies. But however, Shackleton's biggest concern was this demoralization of the crew. He was intentional to keep the men's spirit high. He encouraged all sorts of activity like singing, games, having great like evening events. He listened to them and had an open door policy long before that was practiced in modern companies. He had all the men cross-train in various roles to increase their stimulation and their competence. Surprisingly, during these 10 months, their ship, when it was stuck in the ice, the men were content. One man wrote in his journal after a particular celebration that this was one of the happiest days of my life. Then on October 24th in 1915, things got really worse. The ice shifted, and it wasn't actually moving the ship away from the Antarctic, but rather like crushing the ship down towards even more harder ice. And soon the whole side of the ship was broken, and they needed to unload the ship quickly before something happened. And in 3 weeks, the ship sunk, and all the 28 men were stuck on the ice, thousands of kilometers away from other people. They only had 3 small lifeboats and a pile of gear, and no one knew where they were, and in England they were probably thought that they were dead. So Shackleton had no idea how to get them home safely, but he knew one thing for sure: no one was going to come and save them. That was not going to happen. They didn't have any communication ways. They couldn't get anybody to help them out. So what he did was they decided to cross the ice and pull the 3 lifeboats with 69 sled dogs. So there was a resupply station a few hundred miles away, but it proved impossible to get there. After a few months, the ice began cracking and splitting, and it became too dangerous to stay. On April 9th, 1916, they boarded 3 lifeboats and headed north. After a 16-day perilous journey, they made it to Elephant Island, which was in the middle of the sea, cold, no life, but nobody was there to help them. But they were happy because they were on land, and that was a small comfort. The men were in worse shape than ever before, and demoralization was setting in. They had almost no food, no daily rations. There were small things to eat still, but they were like going into worse condition constantly. Eventually Shackleton saw no other choice but to take the best boat, a few of his best men, and sail across the whole Weddell Sea to the South Georgia whaling station where they started their journey. But that was almost 1,000 kilometers away. But miraculously, after 3 weeks of sailing on the sea, they made it. However, it took still 4 months to get to the ship, get a ship to rescue his crew. But on August 30th, 1916, Shackleton arrived to Elephant Island, and he found all the men he had left behind. All of the men from the expedition survived. Shackleton's journey is amazing. It's in the early 1900s. Was an age of polar expeditions. It was common for men to die during the journey. Why am I talking about this story? This is so close to what a startup is like. You're sort of like in the midst of nobody can help you. You're in the unknown. You need to survive. What kind of steps do you take? So Shackleton, he wouldn't accept death. He used a system to approach and create a strong team that could handle these difficult situations they were facing. Here are the elements of Shackleton's leadership. Model and inspire optimism. Shackleton believed in his mission and his team. His optimism was contagious. He intentionally made decisions to inspire optimism in his crew. He was enthusiastic and clear in his vision. He encouraged singing, games, funs, antics, and other great activities that kept the spirits high during the expedition. Develop a clear shared purpose. Everyone who joined the Antarctic expedition understood the purpose. They were selected in part for their interest and excitement in the purpose. Many times teams form and their purpose is somewhat vague, or each team member has a different idea of that purpose. Clarity around purpose has been shown time and again to be the most important factor to impact the team's success. Build unity and commitment within the team. So Shackleton valued hard work and loyalty above all else. Yet he didn't expect this automatically. He intentionally fostered it. The team's well-being was his top priority, higher than his mission. He knew without the team they could never reach their goal. He got to know each team member personally and understood their strengths and their style. He made sure that team members could come to him with concerns and had this open door policy, which was not definitely the term that Shackleton used. It was coined much later. Create a plan, an alternate plan, and be flexible. After the team left the camp, they traveled in 3 lifeboats searching for land, which they hadn't seen in 15 months. During his 15-day journey, Shackleton changed the plan 4 times. The change was always because new information emerged, and he had to adjust in order to meet the end goal. He avoided getting emotionally attached to a particular plan, no matter how much time he spent devising it. And finally, make the tough decisions. Shackleton continually made difficult decisions throughout the expedition. He would have been terribly unpopular among the crew had he not built relationships and loyalty before doing these tough decisions. He always made the decisions with their best interests in mind. For instance, when the ship arrived in Argentina after crossing the Atlantic, the cook got drunk and disorderly one night, and he was fired. Shackleton did find him a new job on the ship heading to England though. So Shackleton knew that the man was not a good fit for the team. He then hired a new cook who proved to be an excellent addition, but he didn't want this man to suffer too much from being fired, so he got him a new job. Shackleton was heralded by his team as being the greatest leader on earth. I think this is like not too far from like being an amazing person. To implement just one of these elements of his leadership would be valuable for any startup CEO. Looking at this list, that is one thing. Even if a small thing that could put into your team if you're a leader, try to check it out and see if that could be done. Let's go back to discussing what is leadership. So one thing, what it is, that it is about courage. But it's not the courage to make a lot of money, but the courage to treat everybody with equality, to never ascend to a higher level, and to create a safer environment. If you think about the sports team, there you need to create this culture of people keeping up with the pace, because it is still the goal is to win championships, win matches. So everybody needs to keep up with that pace. But then how about a family? Would you fire a member of your family? Like I wrote in this book, which I released earlier this year, The Long-Term Game, that the leader is someone who leads themselves and owns their actions, meaning that when things go wrong, they always feel responsible for their mistakes and shortcomings, and never looks for others to blame. The leader will involve other people to get things done. The leader will prioritize tasks at hand and help others do the same in their tasks. The leader will insist that the founding team has a common mission to follow. Here are 4 leadership principles described by Navy SEAL instructor Jocko Willink and Leif Babin in their leadership book, Extreme Ownership. 1. Cover and move. You need to work as a team to avoid obstacles and to get what you want. Keep things simple. Don't overcomplicate plans. Prioritize and execute. Focus on the goals and achieve them. And finally, decentralize command. Train and trust your subordinates. With these principles, the leader can guide their team to success. To achieve something, they will always work as a team. They will keep things simple with all the decisions they make. They will focus on the top priority goals and execute those. But finally, they will organize discussions around topics that are new to the team and then give trust to the team that they can complete the mission on their own. It's so much about communicating, giving guidance, training, nurturing. You cannot expect people to come in and immediately slide through into their position. You want to train your people, and then you give them the trust. Then on my podcast, the Elite Game Developers podcast, I was mentioning that I've had a lot of gaming CEOs, entrepreneurs. So what are they saying about leadership? First off, I had Selina Pasula, who is the CEO of Fingersoft. We were talking about leadership, and leadership for Celine means that it's about treating people with respect and communicating everything, and not being scared of hiring people who are much smarter than you are. And it's all about working with your ego. Don't make the job about yourself. And that you have to solve through examples. Then things that Celine has changed her mind about in leadership in the recent years, like giving out the power and decision making to where it should be, and creating an environment for learning and growth, and also to understand who you are working with and what kind of culture already exists in the company. Then I had Sean Rutland, the CEO of Hutch, on the podcast, and he was saying about leadership that it is a strong gut feeling that actually people are at their best when they've got a sense of purpose and they're empowered and they can really do things that make a difference to their game. And last year I interviewed Antti Hattara, who's the co-founder and CEO of Starberry Games. And on leadership, we were talking about a lot of topics. And when leadership came up, it was like he was saying that as there's more people in the company becomes a partnership. I'm there to facilitate things getting done. So decisions need to often be made with incomplete information. And it's much better than not doing the decision at all. And last year I was talking with Marina Hallikainen, the CEO of Colossal Order. And she was saying that I have this managing by wandering around style. I like to talk to people. My door is always open. People can share any feedback. I'm making sure to be present and want to catch issues early in if such were to arise, and they always do. It's important to be strict so that we can get things done. I can be slightly annoying to the artistic people in the team. I like to see things getting done. So how do you get better as a leader, as a CEO? Well, first off, take bold steps with courage and be familiar with pain, because growth is always uncomfortable. You can think about becoming a better leader as like going up a ladder. So when you're at one step of the ladder, you can ask for help from a leader who is on the next step of the ladder. Think about you as a startup CEO, could be running a company of 10 people, or you might be running a team of 5 people in a games company. How do you become a better leader, a better manager? Well, ask for guidance and help from people who have managed teams in tougher situations. Maybe there's more people, whatnot. So that is a leader who's one step ahead of you. So when you reach another step, ask for help from the next one above you, and so on. And be prepared to help ones who are below you on the ladder. That's the way we all grow, really. Just to share experiences and to learn and answer questions. So some words on the role of the CEO. There's usually two phases for the CEO. There's the external CEO and the internal CEO. So what's the difference there? So the external CEO is playing the CEO to the outside. He gets the best deals. He plays hardball if necessary. But the internal CEO, who is the CEO to the inside, they're a facilitator and they uphold the culture promise. And you need to leverage the external knowledge. Like I was mentioning, CEOs, leaders, it's always important to look outside into your community, people around you, all the other companies in the ecosystem. Ask questions, figure things out. Don't let the game run your business, but let your curiosity run the business, and go after and ask those questions. And then thinking about the charismatic CEO, that's often something that comes up, that, you know, if you have a CEO who has charisma, that they can really like build big things, build big companies. So is charisma the key to strong leadership, or is it something else? Well, through my research, what I've found is that a charismatic person can use their captivating qualities to lead, but they can also use charm in nefarious purposes. So ultimately, it is the character of the leader rather than the charisma that is a necessary leadership attribute. So character is who we are at the very core, while charisma is something extra. Character without charisma can move mountains. Charisma without character may give the impression of greatness, but it cannot stand the test of time. So trying to lead based on charisma that isn't backed up by something lasting and genuine is ultimately futile. But there are some arguments, like for charismatic leaders who often emerge during times of crisis where it is needed to have something strength. Like if you think about what is needed is somebody who can really lift everybody's spirits up. And a final characteristic I want to mention for a CEO is their presence. So presence of a CEO has to be the charisma, but it also needs to be this kind of like commanding an audience. This type of charisma allows the CEO to take charge, whether speaking with employees, customers, or investors. And when the CEO walks into a meeting, you know who is in charge. And furthermore, this ability to command an audience gives the CEO unique ability to create a winning culture. So building a winning culture comes from constant care and attention from the CEO. And the best way tends for this task to be completed is by communicating a compelling story to in a regular basis to the entire company. I want to talk about a concept that I recently created, which was a visualization that I wanted to come up with, was this great company culture pyramid, specifically for a games company. And I think there's 4 layers to it. You got the people at the bottom. Well, you're creating a safe environment. If you want to build trust in your startup as a leader, make sure that the people know that they can speak up without losing their job or ruining their careers. If not explicitly stated, things will go unspoken. This is totally gonna happen. So you need to be aware of these kind of things, like leadership tends to value visibility over impact when it comes to promotions. Occasional silos within the company, and like this kind of like issues where you won't have a voice if you're a female, you get walked all over, and people have higher expectations of you than your male counterparts. So work on like building a safe environment and belonging environment for everybody. And then going into a learning stage of this pyramid is where you're trying things out, you're building, and you're talking and listening to people with creativity and backing that with data knowledge regarding the market, competition, audience, knowing what's going on. You have to tie these back in. And when you try the things, you experiment, you build prototypes, you launch alpha version of the game on the store, and you look at the data that you're getting back, and then you make those creative decisions by putting together ideas. So people and learning. And then you got the execution layer, which is really important. So you move quickly, you try to learn to have the best decision making possible in your company. That is also something that you need to learn, that always the polish isn't necessary, that speed is more important for you to make more decisions more quickly. And ultimately, when you start combining the best place for people, the best learning environment, the best level of execution, and then you get the great games, which is the outcome. And this is what the leaders should be looking into. These are the different pyramid pillars that you can work on to achieve great games. It's not a consistent, reliable outcome that you will have the best games, but this is for the improved odds, if nothing else. That you don't need to think about, do we have the best odds at making the best games? You will if you follow this pyramid knowledge. As a final thought about leadership, I would really recommend that you guys check out our founder episodes on Elite Game Developers. So I've talked to about 40 different CEOs of gaming companies, and I'm constantly recording more and more episodes. Just last week I had Tor Gunnarsson from Mainframe Industries talking about his style. So leadership, knowledge, and activity. I think these are the areas where everybody in the gaming industry can learn more, because you also start to learn about giving feedback for your leaders and where they can improve. And when you meet other leaders, other startup CEOs coming to you, maybe a team manager comes and asks you for help, you can use this material and go back and talk to them. So please check out elitegamedevelopers.com for more information on leadership. Thank you.
All right. So that was Joakim's session on everything about leadership and life. There's already a bunch of questions here, and I've got loads of thoughts on that. So what we're gonna do now is get Joakim on the line and see where he's gonna take us from here. So let's try. Can we have Joakim? Hello, how you doing? I'm not sure we have audio yet, so our technical staff is on the case. But while that's happening, first of all, thanks a lot for putting that together. That was really impressive. I really love the Shackleton story. There's something about that image of being stuck in ice with nobody anywhere to help you, running out of food, nothing to do. Sort of resonates with my everyday life. And one of the questions that we got actually was, and I'm going to read it out loud here. I love the Shackleton story, but do you have any advice on how to promote fun and games if the entire team is burnt out and doesn't want to join in on any online activities during remote work? So I'm guessing this is about the pandemic specifically. This is tough anywhere, but especially now when we can't really have that team moment. By the way, check that your mic isn't on mute.
It isn't.
Oh, that's perfect. At least I can hear you.
Okay, thanks, man. So the question, I'll happily answer that. I think communication is the best fix for all sorts of angst and anxieties in any kind of group. If you have a leader, like if they can communicate all sorts of things that is the reality, that is kind of like the likelihood, different kind of scenarios, I think that helps a lot of these kind of stressful situations. But you should do that preemptively already before things start going really bad. So creating a cadence of a lot of communication early on when it is still fun. Like don't wait for the trouble to start and then try to fix things, but rather create that cadence from day zero.
That makes sense. Although, what do you do if you missed your boat in this case and now you're in ice? So do you just try to get that board game session going, or is there anything like an emergency maneuver, if you will, that you could do at this point?
Well, then you need to start at that immediate moment of including everybody on what's going on. Honesty also pays off really nicely. So just lay out the situation really well, and also like what kind of action you're taking, and don't play these kind of blame games that never really works, but like figure out some actions that will be taken to improve situations and take control of the situation in a sense as a leader. I think that can pay off the most.
Yeah, makes sense. Now, maybe a bit more personal question from me. I'm just curious. So you had a lot of experience hands-on being a leader, of course, through your previous companies, and then you started doing Elite Game Developers, where like you've been immersing in this for a few years now, really. What do you feel yourself that you've sort of picked up during this time that you didn't maybe know or maybe internalize before, like some learnings for you already as an experienced person?
Well, it's a constant learning. I think that is the big takeaway from a year now with Elite Game Developers, is that I'm constantly learning new things. And when I'm interacting with a lot of startups, I think that gives me so much perspective that I didn't have from when I was doing it basically in one company. But now I'm involved in at least a half a dozen companies, pretty much like not day to day, of course, but sort of like being pulled in, and that's really been beneficial. And I think that's a great way for anybody who is a leader to learn, is to be active with other peers who are leaders, to hear what they're doing, what things they're going through, because you learn so much from that versus just keeping like yourself in a silo in your own company.
Right. So to paraphrase, you'd say that it's not a particular thing you're learning at this point. It's more like getting a new breadth of experience, if you will. So like a constant stream of scenarios and like what reality, like what happens in real life and examples and all.
Yeah.
Like, did I
Yeah,
get that
there's so much exposure. Yeah.
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 Personally, I fully agree. And since you've been doing angel investments and so on, like getting more into kind of other companies nowadays, and this bridges on another question as well. What kind of differences do you see on like young leaders on maybe these companies versus some of the more experienced ones? I'm assuming from like Next Games and some of the big companies, Supercell. Like, what's different when you grow as a leader?
Well, I think first off, gaming is such a passion industry. It's like this art driven industry, and that creates sort of like an area where you start first focusing on just improving your craft, but eventually you notice that somebody needs to be the Shackleton of the game team when the game doesn't, like when, you know, usually this, it's not like how many projects do you need to do before you find something that makes money, like enough to pay salaries. It's not that easy to make games. So like somebody needs to take over that role of learning. And I think that is what I noticed with a lot of startups early on, is that they focus so much on the game, not so much on the culture of the company. There is a culture in any company for sure, but that culture could be something that you could influence with the ways that you've learned, you've talked with other leaders, what they've done. Start doing experiments. There's like game development is all about experiments. So I would suggest all the young leaders to also start experimenting on being leaders. It's like there's no one way to do it, but like try to find something that fits well with your character.
Yeah, makes sense. So if essentially what you're saying is that young leaders often fail to or don't work the culture to begin with, so don't necessarily take like a conscious approach to culture, what would be something that experienced leaders then miss? Like, is there something that you often see that this, like, what's the next problem that people typically have?
Yeah, the next problem is that you grow past your own like sort of area of expertise. Like you go from like being a startup CEO of 10 people to a startup CEO of 30, 50, 100, and there's always like the growth is not like it's exponential, the amount of problems that come. So having more clear ideas on how you approach all these issues that come up, that's where the more experienced people get into trouble, is that they don't actually know all the things that they need to take into consideration when a company is growing really fast.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we see that happen quite a lot. And out of interest, I feel like in the tech industry, where obviously there's just more experience happening, like more iterations than in games, because it's a bigger sector, it's not uncommon for companies to switch CEOs or other leaders as the company moves from kind of phase to phase. And I guess that's exactly for what you were just mentioning. but I haven't seen that happen so much in games. Do you think that would that apply as a solution, or is it just not compatible?
I think it could be applied into gaming more even. I think it's also a situation that we don't have that many experienced, these kind of like gray-haired like professional CEOs in gaming, especially in like live service games. That's definitely lacking. Like you can count those people in like with one hand, the finger of one hand, like how many of those kind of people are in Finland. And then it doesn't really expand when you go outside of Finland that much. Probably in Asia you would have more, but I think then you have like how many people are moving borders, like culturally. There is still differences, like bringing somebody from Asia to run a Finnish growth startup, like something that's growing like crazy. So I would suggest that like people take the time to learn from the greats and improve your own skills versus just replacing yourself. Of course, like if you definitely feel that this is not your passion to actually be running a company that has 200 people, then like just figure it out early on versus like doing something quickly. Try to find the mentors, try to find interesting people out there who might be helpful for you in the future if you decide to step down. Yeah, it's not easy, but I would really like to see more people grow into leaders who can run 100 people companies. That would take the industry forward. That's one of those things that really is lacking, sort of like that. Usually game companies get bought when they're at 50 people or something, at least in the recent times. So how do we stay independent? How do we learn as leaders to take the next step?
All right, that's a big question, and I don't think we have the answer for that yet. But Joakim, thank you so much for your time, and for everybody else, do catch on to his amazing podcast series and newsletter at Elite Game Developers. I love it myself, and I think it's time to move on for the next session. But Joakim, thanks so much for your time, and let's catch up sometime.
Yes, we'll do. Thanks, Teemu.
Yeah. Cheers.